He was declared dead 10 years ago, but I just saw him in a crowd. The press of the Saturday market crowd was a familiar comfort to Maya, 39 and a creature of habit. She enjoyed the vibrant chaos, the scent of spices mingling with fresh produce, the murmur of countless conversations. She was browsing a stall overflowing with colorful textiles when her gaze snagged on a face across the bustling walkway. A face she hadn't seen in 10 years. A face she thought she would never see again. It was Ben, her husband, declared dead a decade ago after a tragic boating accident. Her breath hitched. The world around her seemed to blur, the sounds of the market fading into a dull hum. It couldn't be him. It was impossible. Ben's body had never been recovered. The official report had been conclusive. He was gone. Yet, the man across the way had his eyes. The same deep-set, thoughtful eyes she had loved. The same slightly crooked nose, a result of a childhood baseball incident. Even the way he tilted his head when he seemed to be listening intently to someone beside him, it was Ben. But there were differences. This man's hair was longer, streaked with gray at the temples. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, etched by time and perhaps something else. He looked older, wearier. Like someone who had lived a decade she knew nothing about. A wave of dizziness washed over Maya. Was she hallucinating? Was grief, buried but never truly gone, finally playing tricks on her mind? She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, but the man was still there, his familiar silhouette unmistakable amidst the throng. He turned slightly, and Maya saw the small, crescent-shaped scar just above his left eyebrow, a mark he'd gotten from a fall as a child. It was him. It had to be. Her heart began to pound, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. 10 years. 10 years of mourning, of trying to rebuild a life shattered by his loss. And now, here he was, alive, standing in a Saturday market as if no time had passed. She started moving towards him, pushing through the crowd, her eyes fixed on his back. Ben, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the market noise. Ben, he didn't hear her. He turned again, laughing at something the woman beside him had said. The sound of his laughter, a sound she hadn't heard in a decade, pierced through her. It was undeniably him. She reached him, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch his arm. Ben, she said, her voice louder this time, filled with a desperate hope. The man turned, his smile fading as he looked at her. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something, surprise, recognition, crossing his face before being quickly masked by confusion. I'm sorry, he said, his voice deeper than she remembered, but still carrying a familiar cadence. Do I know you? Maya stared at him, her mind reeling. He didn't recognize her. It's me, she said, her voice shaking. Maya, your wife. The man's brow furrowed. He looked at the woman beside him, who regarded Maya with polite curiosity. I think you have the wrong person, he said, his tone gentle but firm. My name is Daniel. Daniel, not Ben. But the face, the eyes, the scar. It was him. It had to be. No, Maya insisted, her voice rising in desperation. It's you, Ben. Don't you remember? The lake house. Our wedding. Lily. The man's eyes flickered again, a shadow of something dark and unreadable passing through them. He shook his head slowly. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never been married, and my name is Daniel. He turned back to the woman beside him, taking her hand. Come on, Sarah, he said, leading her away through the crowd. Sarah, that had been Maya's name before she married Ben. Maya stood frozen, the bustling market swirling around her, the joy and vibrancy now feeling like a cruel mockery. He was alive, but he didn't remember her. He was calling another woman by her name. Disbelief warred with a crushing sense of betrayal. How could he be alive after all these years? And how could he not remember her, their life together, their daughter? She followed them, keeping a distance, her mind racing. Daniel and Sarah browsed the market, their interactions casual, intimate. They held hands, they laughed, they seemed like any other couple enjoying a Saturday morning. Maya watched them, a ghost from a past he no longer acknowledged. The man who looked like her Ben had built a new life, with a new woman, seemingly oblivious to the decade of grief she had endured. She followed them until they left the market, getting into a car she didn't recognize. She memorized the license plate, a small, desperate act in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. Back in the quiet of her apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual, filled with the echoes of a life that might have been. She pulled out old photographs of Ben, tracing his familiar features with a trembling finger. The resemblance to the man in the market was undeniable. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, replaying the encounter in her mind, searching for any flicker of recognition in his eyes, any hint that the Ben she knew was still there, buried beneath a layer of lost time or something more sinister. The next morning, armed with the license plate number, Maya went to the police. She recounted the story, the boating accident, Ben's death certificate, and then the impossible sighting at the market. The officer listened patiently, his expression a mixture of sympathy and skepticism. He ran the license plate. The car was registered to a Daniel and Sarah living in a nearby town. There was no mention of a Ben. Maya felt a surge of frustration. They weren't taking her seriously. To them, it was a case of mistaken identity, a grieving widow seeing a resemblance. But she knew what she had seen. It was Ben. She decided to investigate on her own. She found the address associated with the license plate and drove to the town. It was a quiet, unassuming place. The house matched the registration. She parked down the street and watched. Hours passed. Finally, she saw them. Daniel and Sarah. They looked happy, ordinary. There was no sign of a hidden past, no indication of a life lived and lost. Maya felt a growing sense of desperation. What had happened to Ben? How could he be alive but not remember her? Was he suffering from amnesia? Was he deliberately pretending not to know her? She tried to approach him again, waiting outside their house. When Daniel came out to get the mail, she called his name. Ben. He turned, his expression wary. Look, I told you at the market, my name is Daniel. I don't know you, but it's me, Maya, she pleaded. We were married. We had a daughter. Daniel's eyes hardened. Leave me alone, he said, his voice cold. If you don't, I'll call the police. He went back inside, closing the door firmly in her face. Maya stood there, the reality of his rejection hitting her like a physical blow. He didn't remember, or he didn't want to. Days turned into weeks. Maya's obsession grew. She couldn't let it go. She knew it was him. There had to be an explanation. She started digging into public records, searching for any link between Ben and this Daniel. She found nothing. No shared history, no connection whatsoever. It was as if Ben had simply ceased to exist and Daniel had taken his place. Then, she found something. A small, almost overlooked detail in the old police report about Ben's disappearance. A witness had reported seeing a second person on the boat that day, someone who didn't match Ben's description. The report had dismissed it as unreliable, the witness likely confused. A seed of a terrifying possibility began to sprout in Maya's mind. What if it hadn't been just Ben on the boat? What if there had been someone else? Someone who looked like him? She went back to the witness, an elderly man who still lived in the town near the lake. He was hesitant at first, his memory faded by time. But when Maya showed him a photograph of Ben, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. There was another one, he said slowly. Looked just like him, but different somehow, quieter. Twins. Had Ben had a twin brother no one knew about? It seemed impossible, yet it was the only explanation that fit. She dug deeper into Ben's past, contacting distant relatives, old family friends. Eventually, she found someone who remembered a brief mention of a twin brother, given up for adoption at birth. A secret Ben had never known, or never shared. Daniel was Ben's twin. He had been on the boat that day. Perhaps Ben had died, and Daniel had survived, taking his place, assuming his life, even his wife. But why? And why the denial? Maya confronted Daniel again, armed with this new information. She showed him a copy of the adoption records, the faded photograph of two identical baby boys. This time, he didn't deny it. His carefully constructed facade crumbled. He looked at the photograph, his eyes filled with a deep, unreadable sorrow. He finally spoke, his voice low and weary. He was Ben's twin, separated at birth. He had found Ben years later, drawn to him by an inexplicable connection. They had kept their relationship a secret. On the day of the boating accident, they had been together. Ben had drowned. Daniel had survived. In his grief and confusion, he had made a desperate decision. He would become Ben. He would take his life, his wife, his future. He had convinced himself it was a way to keep Ben alive, in a way. He had undergone surgery to alter subtle differences in his appearance. He had studied Ben's mannerisms, his memories, piecing together a life that wasn't his. He had even changed his name. But the guilt had been a constant weight. The denial had become a prison. He loved Sarah, Maya, but their life together was built on a lie, on the grave of his brother. The encounter at the market had shaken him. Seeing Maya again, the woman his brother had loved, had brought the carefully buried truth to the surface. His denial had been a desperate act of self-preservation, but the weight of his deception had become too heavy to bear. The truth, when it finally came out, was more complex and heartbreaking than Maya could have ever imagined. Ben was gone. The man who looked like him was his twin, living a stolen life built on grief and deception. The man she had loved was dead, and the man standing before her, wearing his face, was a stranger haunted by the ghost of his brother. The reunion she had so desperately hoped for was a cruel illusion, a reminder of the devastating and unexpected ways loss can reshape reality.